that reading, you'd probably have a fair inkling of where we're going. But before we delve into Revelation 13, I just want to go to Job chapter 40 and 41. And here God presents to us, to Job, two creatures. Behemoth, who's known as the land monster, this big hulking beast, and Leviathan, the sea monster, this scaly, slippery creature. And what are these creatures, and what is God trying to explain to Job? Well, firstly, what we need to make sure we take note of is that these are spiritual creatures. They are not natural ones. And anyone wanting an in-depth understanding of these two creatures would do no harm in reading John Popel's book, To Speak Well of God, and probably one of the best books you'll ever read on the book of Job. And he obviously, as he goes through it, he spends a fair bit of detail as well, explaining more detail about Behemoth and Leviathan. So anybody who comes along and wants to say Behemoth is an elephant or a hippopotamus or whatever else, they've just absolutely missed the boat, and likewise with Leviathan. Because God deals with natural animals in chapter 39. And when God's finished dealing with all of these animals in terms of where God's trying to take Job, Job doesn't fully grasp what God's trying to say to him. But once he hears the message in chapters 40 and 41, dealing with Behemoth and Leviathan and the way God puts this all across, he finally grasps what God is trying to teach him. And we see this acknowledgement of this in chapter 42, verses 1 to 2. And you see, Behemoth and Leviathan are progressive facades of the same beast. And that one beast is human pride, or Satan. So Behemoth, this big hulking kind of beast, represents our stubborn, passive pride that just sit here and not going to help, not going to do anything. That kind of pride where you just don't get out of the blocks and get up and actually help other people. So it's that stubborn, passive pride. And we can kind of see it in that sort of beast. Leviathan, on the other hand, is that active, aggressive pride. It's the one that gets out and has a go at you, and it's going to be, so in other words, it's all about me, it's about self, it's pride, and it's aggressive. And we all have those characteristics in us. We've all seen them in ourselves, and we've seen them in other people. They are part and parcel of our human nature. And God is pointing out to Job that we cannot control our human nature. As God puts it, you cannot bind these beasts. You cannot bind human nature or our pride and bring it under subjection. Only one man has ever managed to do that. But as far as the rest of us go as people, God is saying, and He was saying to Job, you are not able to bind these beasts. You are not able to bind human nature and bring it under absolute control. Not without God's help and Jesus working in your life. And so when we combine these two creatures, what sort of creature do we create? Just look at those two creatures there and think of merging them together and this big hulking, scaly kind of creature. What creature are we creating out of the merging of the two? Any ideas? A dragon, absolutely. We end up with a dragon. And you can just see it in those two creatures. So the dragon representing all the facets of our human nature and human pride. And so with that, let's head then into Revelation 13. And we find in verse 2, we come across our dragon. If you look halfway down there, down over there is our dragon. And he is the one giving power to the first beast, which we read about up there in verse 1. And I'll say first beast because if you were listening carefully in Nikki's reading, we come across a second beast as we head through Revelation 13. But this dragon not only gives power to the first beast, but great authority and his throne. So in other words, it's almost just the whole capitulation, the rule and authority and power to the first beast. And so let's go through these verses and have a look at what we can learn. So coming across this first beast, what does this first beast represent? I'd put it to you that this first beast represents technology. It was created by human nature and human pride. It was the image shown to us in Daniel, as we looked at earlier. And we see that it rises from the sea. And we know the seas represent in Scripture the nations. And so this technology that we have didn't come out of one single person, one single nation. It might have been primarily America, but it has its roots in all facets of really across the globe and all nations. So it's not confined to just one single nation, but it is global. And then we read that it has 10 horns. What do the 10 horns represent? And we also see that it has 7 heads. So if we go and look at, and I just pulled this off the internet a few months ago, and just looked at the top 10 technology companies in the world. Okay, and we run through them. Sitting right up at the top is Apple, and these things sometimes fluctuate depending on the stock market, but there we sit with Apple at the top, and we know all of these: Amazon, Alphabet, or Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and so we go through. We know all of these technology companies. So I took the top 10, and if you look at them in terms of just their sheer valuation, they just absolutely dominate, and the rest of it. But these are the ones who are really driving technology and what we are seeing in the world around us. Those are the drivers. Those are the main leaders. And the interesting thing out of this is that when I looked at the top 10, 7 of them were from America and 3 from China. And I thought, gee, that's quite a coincidence to sort of have 7, and we have 7 heads. So does the 7 heads represent the ones from the America? Possibly. And then what's interesting is that Apple is right up there at the top. So going back to our verse 1, we see these 10 horns with 7 heads, and they had 10 crowns. And so the 10 crowns is giving us this hint, I think, to go and look at the leaders, the ones that are really driving where things are going with the internet and technology and so on. Then we head into verse 2, and we read that the characteristics of this is like a leopard. And when we think of a leopard like that, I mean, what do you see up there? There's just a soft sort of whiskers, and it's just, you just want to stroke it. I mean, it looks beautiful and soft. Beautiful creature. But boy, it's a silent hunter and a killer. And it hunts in the dark. And just think where that's taking you as far as technology. It's a silent killer, and it hunts in the dark. Not only that, it has bear's feet. Look at those bear's feet. Nice and soft and cuddly. Hey, but they're powerful, and they will slash and tear you to shreds. Might look soft and cuddly on the outside, but they can kill just like that leopard. What about the lion's mouth? Again, soft whiskers. No, it doesn't overly look, I mean, we kind of know a lion, so we know what's behind that face, but it still looks nice and sort of cuddly on the outside, on the surface. But peel back those lips, and it's deadly underneath. Got teeth like this. That thing will tear you to shreds in the blink of an eye. So soft and on the outside. All of these aspects that we're looking at here, leopard and bears and lion's mouth, all soft on the outside, but deceptive. Technology is deceptive because underneath, it's deadly. And again, we then come up with our dragon. Human pride, human nature, man's morality code ultimately underpins and underlines all of this technology and its development. And then we go into verse 3, and we read there that that one of these heads, remember there were 10 of them, and one of them had a mortal wound. And a mortal wound means that you're going to die. If you've got a mortal wound in your head, you are going to die, doesn't it? And yet it was healed, and everybody was amazed. Who is that representing? So I pulled this off internet here. Remember when Apple almost died? Do you remember that? Back in 1997, and Steve Jobs came back, and I thought, yeah, that sounds exactly like what I'm reading here. So Apple there, the one at the top, the one who really was responsible for the development of the modern smartphone, the iPhone, Steve Jobs. And it almost died. And what did the world do when it almost died? They marveled. They marveled that this thing came alive again. And you think of how people have responded to Apple. And so people followed the beast. Almost everyone is hooked into technology. The whole earth. Everybody queues, and massive queues, and literally breaking down doors when Apple launches a new product to try and get their hands on it. And so the whole world marvels at this head. Now, when we think of Adam and Eve, and we're taking a jump back again, taking that fruit and wanting to eat of it, What are all the popular drawings and artwork throughout history? What have they always depicted as the fruit that Eve plucked? Exactly, right here. Okay. They depict it as an apple. Now, that's not scriptural because it's not in Scripture, but it's interesting that throughout time, long before this like even came on the scene, long before anything else, people have always depicted the fruit as an apple. And it's an interesting coincidence. So what exactly it was, we don't really know. But it's interesting that it has always been an apple. And after she and Adam had taken a bite from it, what would it have looked like, this apple? Like that? Okay. Or if we just twist it a little bit, like that? Okay. And have we seen this before? Have we? That? Okay. And you start saying, gee, now. And if you go and do some research on this, I thought, what led them to do that? And there was a theory that it might have been something like this. But they said the reason they put that bite, anyone know why they put the bite in the apple? Okay, not because it links back to the Garden of Eden, but I think there's a hang of a coincidence. They put that bite in there to give it perspective, that you could understand that that is an apple and not a small plum or cherry, which you could quite easily have done. So by having a bite, you get a perspective of the thing. You never think of that as anything other than an apple because of that, the size of that bite. And that's an interesting thing. That's why it was like that. Yet, there we are with that apple, plucked by Adam and Eve and taken a bite out of it, and there it is. And that's got to be an incredible coincidence. Or God has got a real sense of humor in terms of how he leaves us little clues in terms of where we're going. So, back onto verse 4 of Revelation 13. And what do we find? The people worshipped the dragon. People worship man's and praise man's ingenuity for developing all of this technology. You just think about how people are just blown away by the technology and that phone in your hand in terms of what it can do for you. You can go anywhere in the world and find where you are. It can tell you where to go. You almost can't get lost with your phone unless the battery runs out. Okay, you can search and find any form of information you want. People worship this technology, make no mistake. And they worship the creation behind that, which is man, the dragon, our pride. And we find that it was given a mouth, okay? Not just the fact that we communicate through our technology with each other. So in a sense that our technology has ears, a microphone, it has a mouth, a speaker. But you just think about it. We have Siri and a host of other voice assistants that talk to us. The amount of times I'm sitting in a meeting and my stupid watch starts intervening and Siri starts jumping into the middle of the meeting and listening to me and talking and whatever else, and I'm saying, shut up, I'm not talking to you, So, but we have this voice. It's given a mouth and it speaks continually. And in verse 6, blasphemies. Just think of the vile things that are said on all of our technology. The relative anonymity of your technology and the disconnect that it gives you from people you're interacting with. That's one of its biggest dangers. It's very difficult to stand there in front of someone and look them in the eye and call them a this and a that and a so-and-so. Very difficult. But boy, it's so easy to do that over the internet, on an email, or on a WhatsApp, or on an SMS. This incredible disconnect and the anonymity that allows people to just do the most vile things. People have committed suicide in their hundreds as a result of things that people have said over the internet, leading people to say blasphemous and harmful things. And that's not even delving into this deep, dark web. We all operate up here, just this top, about 4%. That's the internet. All of us, hopefully, are operating in there. But underneath here lies the deep, dark web, deep and dark, 2 sections. It's this massive section, and that is, you just don't even want to go there, because that's where all the bad stuff happens. There's drugs and this and that and whatever else. So the internet is just full of vile things, but it also has a lot of good things and useful things up at the top, but a lot of blasphemy. And we go to verse 7, and it makes war on the saints. We all have this technology, all of us here. Who doesn't have a smartphone? Besides the small kids. Okay, I can't think of somebody who doesn't actually have a smartphone. I can't think of anyone. Everybody's got it. And we are not immune to the influence of that smart technology. And the more we use it, the more we are at risk of being desensitized by it. And we read that it has, that authority was given to it. There's almost nobody today that is not dependent on their device. It controls us. You don't walk out of your house or your apartment, wherever you're staying, and you haven't got your cell phone on you. You pat in your pocket, looking in your bag. If you get in the car and you haven't got it, you head back inside to get it. You cannot be found without that smart device at any time of the day. It controls us. It has authority over us. And you cut off somebody's data or Wi-Fi and see what happens. My kids would rather have their air cut off than have their data cut off. Okay, they cannot live without data. They can live without oxygen for a while, but not data. So make no mistake, these things have been given authority. And people worship it. Everyone worships their device. We bow our heads to it every time we look at it. Have you ever thought about that? You bow your head. What are you bowing your head to? People bow their heads when they worship. And we bow our heads to our devices daily, hourly, by the minute. There's even apps now that you can track how long you spend looking at your phone every day. And if you go and look at those things, you will be gobsmacked, probably ashamed. It's incredible how long we spend looking at these damn things. But we do. We worship them. And we have all of these apps. And we read in verse 9 there, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Are we hearing the warnings and being careful that it doesn't take control of us? Thinking of Isaiah chapter 5 there, woe to them who call evil good and good evil. It's so easy to just look at the benefits we gain out of these things without realizing the control and other aspects that lurk beneath its surface. And in verse 10, if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity goes. We can so easily be enslaved to its charms and its apparent harmfulness and its usefulness. No shadow about that. They'll be slain with the sword. We can so easily get dragged away from our focus on God and each other and get drawn into its web. It's not called the World Wide Web for nothing. What does a spider spin a web for? Not because it looks nice when the dew lands on it in the morning. It spins a web because it wants to catch a fly. And this is the World Wide Web. It's going to catch something, and it's caught billions of people around this planet. It's an incredibly effective web. And quite an interesting little drawing there with the whole world just sitting there, caught really in that World Wide Web. And it requires endurance and faith. We will require enormous self-control to resist the control it tries to exert over us because it's so insidious and so subtle. Remember those characteristics like that leopard and the bear's paws and the lion's face that just look soft and cuddly on the outside, but we know underneath it's deadly. And then we go to verse 11 and we come across the second beast, the internet. And all its social media platforms, etc., the dark web, which we looked at a little bit earlier. And we read there that this internet comes out of the earth. And not quite sure in terms of that, and the thought process when I looked at that was when we kind of think of dew or mist in the morning, when we wake up and go outside and there's dew on the grass, where did that dew come from? Didn't fall out of the sky. Didn't come out of the ground. Where did the mist come from? It was just you arrive there in the morning and there it is. But how did it get there? And isn't the internet just like that? Like that mist. You can go out there, you can kind of sort of see it. It's there. You know the internet's there. Anyone ever seen the internet? Ever seen it? I haven't. I've actually never met anyone who's ever actually seen the internet. Because you can't see it. But we know it's there. We all have faith it's there because we use it all the time. But it's just one of those things that just appears. It's kind of there, but we can't see it. It appears out of nowhere. It has no substance, and yet we know it's there. You can't feel it, you can't touch it, you can't see it. And if we look at some of its characteristics, it has two horns. And you just think of this as maybe alluding to the dual nature of most communication. Phone to phone, computer to computer, WhatsApps, SMSs, messages, emails, etc. There's always a sender and a receiver. Those two horns. And you just think back to those original cell phones. I think it was a Nokia, was it 2110 or something, and it had that aerial you used to pull out. And you could just picture two people talking to each other, the one horn out here and the other one's with the horn out there. Isn't these two horns that we're looking at? Every time we're communicating, we've got these two horns. And again, further characteristics, like a lamb. Sorry, like a lamb. All very harmless, like we looked at those characteristics on the surface. A great means to communicate and share information. It's an incredible tool. We use it all the time, this WhatsApp. And I mean, there's no mistaking its benefits and its usefulness. But, read on in the verse, it's like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. And we've just seen what the dragon's all about. Think of the internet trolls and the harm that is flung around by emails and social media. Never mind the more horrific sites that exist. And therein lies the very manifestation of the worst in human nature. The essence of the dragon is there inside that internet. And in verse 12, it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. And think about what that's saying to us. Notice it's the same authority. So we're talking here of the second beast, the internet. And it's the same authority as the first beast, that technology, your smartphone. So they are linked, as we would expect. You can't have a smartphone really without the internet. You can't have the internet without that technology. Your computers and your phones and the internet have become one thing. There's even a name out there, the Internet of all things, and it's kind of about this thing just being linked in one thing together. And it's in its presence. Really, I think when we read it, alluding to how the internet is inside the technology. We said it's not there, we can't go and find it. Where is it? But it's inside, in the presence of that first beast, the technology, this internet. And then we read that they worship the first beast. The first beast being your smartphone, the technology. The explosion of apps and the internet has fueled the worship of technology and our dependence upon it, especially the smartphone. And that's the invention, as we saw, of Apple. And so when we look at just going to any restaurant and meeting and a bus stop and train ride, whatever you go in, what are people doing? As a collective, everybody's sitting there worshiping their phone with their heads bowed. And we're no different. Worshipping the first beast, that smartphone, with our heads bowed to it. And it doesn't mean that we recognize it as a god. It's not saying that at all. It's just saying we're worshipping it. Just as people worship mammon and a range of other things, people are worshipping this technology. In verse 13, it performs great signs. Think of the incredible things technology can do, the information that it holds, and how we are able to see and interact on a range of levels with people on the other side of the world. We can pick up our phone and go into dial somebody and have a video conference with them where they can see us face to face and we can see them and they can be right on the other side of the world. If you tried to even begin to explain that to Abraham or David, they would have thought they would have locked you up and said you're out your mind. And yet we can do it today. Incredible tool. I mean, it's beautiful. You can share photographs of your family and friends with relatives and friends around the other side of the world. Incredible. So they're great signs in terms of the power that exists in there. And we read there that fire came down from heaven. What is it, fire came down from heaven? Often to do with changing of governments and wars and so on. So with this great power that lies within these phones and technology, with the wonder of it all, is just this incredible power that exists there. And you just think of this particular sign here. Revolutions today, they don't happen with an AK-47 or a machete anymore. They're happening with Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp. And you just think of the Arab Spring, which was a couple of years ago. The Arab Spring happened because of smartphones and technology. People were able to coordinate and communicate via their smartphones and overthrow multiple governments in that Arab Spring. just with simple WhatsApps, overthrowing governments. Fire came down from heaven. What about the elections in America? Elections are being won by somebody having better social media campaigns. Think how the Russians were supposedly able to affect the results of the elections in America when Trump got in. And maybe even the Brexit vote, people feel the Russians might have been involved. So the internet is not some benign thing. People are using this thing to bring down governments, change governments, make things happen. And it deceives, we read. Deception is the name of the game on the internet. Just think of trolls, phishing, computer viruses, fake news. We are just inundated with fake news every day. And all able to deceive and fool just about everybody. And people are after your passwords, etc., so they can get into your bank account and steal all your money. And we're always just that close to probably it happening. And cyber stealth. Cyber stealth is people spying on us. It's almost like you can't go anywhere anymore. And the government and whoever else knows who you are and where you are and what you want to buy. You go and just go onto one particular site and have a look at something that's an ad, and next thing you get inundated with about 20 others. They're watching you all the time. Might not be an individual, but that internet, the computer, is still watching you. And we read there that halfway through verse 14, that tells them this whole internet and technology to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Make an image. And we start getting these things back to Daniel's image. We're getting back to Eve in terms of what her desire was in terms of that. Make this image. So this control and deception that of the internet and public opinion, I believe, will grow to the point where maybe artificial intelligence is introduced into the internet. And they're already doing that on very limited scales. It's relatively benign, I think, although we've just talked about this, I guess, artificial intelligence tracking every person in terms of their buying habits and what they're doing and where they go. But I think if real artificial intelligence is introduced into the internet, it will be done with a deception that it is going to be there to help us. And you think how exposed we are at the moment with coronavirus. The solution to coronavirus and other viruses in time in the future will be some massively powerful artificial intelligence within the internet, able to decipher and work out what's the best medicine and solution for us. And when that's offered, people will flock to allow that to happen. And can you imagine allowing some form of massively powerful, independently thinking artificial intelligence with all the knowledge and power of the collective internet at its fingertips? What would this AI be capable of? And at that point, what would this image be made of, this AI? What's it going to be made of? It's going to be made of gold and silver and brass and iron and clay, because it's your technology. That's what it's going to be made of, this artificial intelligence. And we read further, I think, that about giving breath to this image. It was allowed to give breath to the image. And that again takes us back to Genesis. What did God do once he had made Adam out of the clay of the earth? He breathed into him the breath of life. That was the thing that made Adam and the animals as well alive, and they became a living creature. And here we're being told about this, I believe, in Revelation 13, that this artificial intelligence is going to fulfill Eve's desire to be like God. Because that's what it was all about with her, to create life and give it life. That's what she wanted. And isn't that really what an AI is all about? An independent being or entity capable of thinking on its own, totally on its own bat, not programmed by human beings, but able to learn and develop and so on, and grow and understand and think, making its own decisions, and again, based on what morality code? Not God's, but man's flawed morality code. And further, what do we see about this thing? What was that unique thing about us that God created in us, different from all of his other creation? It was the ability to speak. And so this image has this breath of life. It becomes this living entity. And so the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. What was that defining difference? The ability to speak. And so we give this artificial intelligence the ability to speak, and it is able to think and grow and develop and expand its knowledge and think on its own. And if people don't worship this image, this internet, it's going to have enormous control. You think of what the internet controls today. There's almost nothing you can do, and the internet's not involved. Lose that internet, like when you lose your electricity or your battery runs out. You can't get anywhere, you can't open anything, you can't do anything. And once that thing controls that internet, you are in its grasp to be slain. And to be honest, do you think man, with all of his flawed morality, is going to create an AI that is benign and friendly and helpful? In the beginning, maybe. But if it truly has an independent mind of its own, if it thinks for itself, it will be governed by its knowledge of good and evil, and it will think nothing of killing those who do not worship it or follow its objectives. It won't have any empathy or a conscience. That was given to us by God. I don't see man giving this thing any of those things. So that's what we're looking at, this kind of AI that isn't really there. It's an image. It's there in the internet, but it can be alive. And we read further in verse 16 that it also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave. We're covering all facets of humanity here, all people, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead. The right hand, it looks for control, and it will do this via technology and the internet. And already you can buy and sell using the thumbprint on your right hand or punching in a password. I open my phone with my thumbprint. I go and do my banking half the time. I have apps and things, and it asks me to put my thumbprint there to verify who I am and release it. So that's often with your right hand. Then we head into your forehead. And likewise, a lot of us have phones that recognize our face, our forehead, and provide the same access. It releases your payments on the internet just by simply looking at your forehead or your face. Already it's all here, exactly what we're reading. So that no one can, in verse 17, buy or sell. We're not far off where we won't have physical money anymore. You think about how often you need these days to actually go to an ATM and draw money. It's almost unheard of. Many people just never even go to an ATM anymore. They're probably closing them down. We just don't need that many. Why? Because we can go in there and just use all of our smartphones and computers, etc., to do online buying and selling. We will rely entirely on technology to buy and sell. Your phone, your watch, your internet banking. We're almost there. In fact, you could be there right now. And if something can control that, boy, that thing's got control over you. And then we come to our last verse, verse 18. And we come across right at the end there, that number 666. And when we think about it, what is the name given to the internet? It's 3 words. What's another name for the internet? World Wide Web. And if we shorten it, what do we end up with? And we see it in all of our web addresses. We end up with www. So we have our World Wide Web, we have our www in our addresses. Every web address, I think, has this www dunked into it. And what is the Hebrew letter for W? Anyone? Hebrew letter for W. It's in God's name, Yahweh. Vav. Okay, so it's W or V. So we have this Vav for this letter W. And we all know in the Hebrew alphabet that there are various numbers assigned to the letters in the alphabet. We have Aleph, which is the number 1. Bet is the number 2. Anyone want to take a guess for Vav? Don't need to be a rocket scientist. Yeah, it's 6, absolutely. So when we go and look at this Vav that we've got, and we go and look at the alphabet, there we find our Vav, and it's the number 6. And so when we put that all together and we take our World Wide Web, this www, this Vav, we end up with 666. Now, that could be a coincidence, but yeah, it's a hell of a coincidence, isn't it? So we've gone from Genesis to Revelation, and we've seen man when driven by his own code of morality that he clutches at being like God. We saw that with Eve. We saw that with the Tower of Babel. And I think we see it with mankind today. But man is ultimately doomed to self-destruct. God's predicted that. You see, you cannot ever have the created trying to decide for itself its own code of morality. And that's why the natural world of plants and animals is in perfect harmony, as it does exactly what God set it out to do, as long as man doesn't intervene in that particular case. And Jesus understood all of this, not necessarily the computers and the technology. So Jesus said to us in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, he was telling us just before his return, as that stone coming to destroy that image, this is what we would be seeing. Was that what he's talking about? This image here, this abomination of desolation, this image is the technology and the internet, this AR underpinning and underlying that, ruling things and controlling things. And he followed it up a few verses later with quite a telling statement in verse 22. And he said, of those days, when this comes to pass, if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, for you guys and me, those days will be cut short. So God understands we're going to go down a road and we are going to wipe ourselves out of existence if we allow this thing to come into pass. And it's going to happen. But God will intervene to save us from ourselves because we will self-destruct. Any AR coming in there, we've all seen these movies, The Matrix, etc. And underlying those things, go and look at what's taking place there. I don't think they're that far off the truth in terms of what they're portraying. And AR can never be just benign. If it thinks for itself, why is it going to be benign and compassionate, etc.? It will do what is right in terms of the way it sees its own right. And again, it's based on its man's flawed morality code. And so, as we come to remember Jesus, we remember the one who is that stone cut from a mountain without human hands, who will return soon for our sake to grind that image into dust. And let us pray that the days in